and then we look for ones that have that kind of format, that SW underscore name underscore, and then active, inactive, etc. So we can find those. So really, it's one of the reasons that we designed it like this is because personally, as a programmer, I always hate like having to register switch handlers or just event handlers. I don't want to say, send me this. I just want to be able to define it in a meaningful way and have it automatically be sent out. So that's what this enables us to do. So you don't have to, if you change the switch name, you only have to change it in one place or so. So we're going to do something in this switch handler here. We're going to say self.game.lamps.5k.schedule. What does that mean? So we're saying self.game, that's a reference to our game controller object. And our game controller object has an object called lamps, which is a collection of all of our lamps that we defined in the machine configuration file. We just so happen to have a lamp called 5K, and we're going to send it the schedule command, which Gerry was talking about earlier. We're going to send it the schedule command with the schedule of FF00, FF00. And if you're familiar with hex code, that's just 1111, 0011, you can imagine. So this would make our lamp called 5K start kind of flashing, right? And that's really, you can see dot, dot, dot. There's two parameters that I left off there, but they're really simple. Really pretty easy to start a lamp flashing. Now here's another switch handler. And this one's a little more sophisticated looking than the previous one. So switch saucer active for 500 milliseconds. So that means that once the saucer switch is in the active state, once the ball has been on that switch for 500 milliseconds, which is a pretty long time, then call this method, and only then. And if you've thought about writing pinball code, you may have thought about how the ball may go into the saucer and bounce right back out. It doesn't actually settle in most of the time. Or maybe you need to adjust your game if it's doing that. But the ball is wild, as they say. So it turns out to be really helpful to have switch handlers like this and to not have to do a bunch of icky code to make that work. So the mode stuff is able to look at this method name and say, oh, okay, 500 milliseconds. You could use any value there. You can use 5 seconds or 2 seconds or 1 millisecond or whatever. Whatever is appropriate for your switch. And now in this step, we're going to take that same 5K lamp. We're going to turn it off with the disable command. We're going to award 5,000 points to the player, and then you'll see we're dipping into this coils collection here. We're finding the eject coil, and we're going to pulse the eject coil. So that's going to kick the ball right back out. And if you're thinking about this critically, you'll recognize that there's probably a few more cases that we want to handle, and that this is probably not structured ideally for a saucer. But the point is to really this slide's just an excuse to demonstrate how switch handlers work. Okay, so we have our simple saucer. How do we actually use it within the game? So we're defining a new subclass here. We probably would have done this earlier in the process, but we're calling it my game because we're not very imaginative. And it's a subclass of basic game. I haven't talked about basic game, but basic game is itself a subclass or a kind of game controller. So, and really, it's the product of Gerry and I writing a lot of different test code for this game, writing a lot of game controllers, and getting tired of using the same code over and over again. So we took the stuff that we use the most, like the DMD control stuff. We have some stuff for showing the DMD preview on the desktop. We took that and we rolled it into this one class to make it really easy to do what we think 90% of the people will want to do. If you don't like that, you're certainly welcome to use game controller, and you're not going to be losing too much. So we have this method here called game started, and as you can imagine, that method gets called when the game starts. So when the ball falls into the pseudo game and all that. And then we're going to create an instance of our simple saucer method. You'll notice that we're passing the game controller, which is self, and the priority, we're setting that to 5, and then we're going to add it to the mode queue. So once modes.add gets called, that mode is actually active, and it's going to start receiving switch events immediately. Similarly, when the game ends, we probably don't want the saucer to keep working in the same way it was working in awarding points. So we're just going to remove the saucer from the mode queue. And at that point, it's no longer receiving switch events, and it's kind of taking out the loop. Okay, so the DMD. The DMD is one of my favorite parts of all this stuff. And I've probably spent too much time on it already, but the point is that we've taken a lot of time to make a lot of useful classes, to make it as easy as I think it would be reasonable to expect controlling the DMD to be. So we have a lot of classes here, well, 5, but there's many more behind the scenes. A lot of them are subclasses of these. So we have animation, frame. Animation is a collection of frames. We have font classes. We have layers, which I'm going to talk about in detail in a second here. We also have transitions that make it pretty easy to do nice transitions between layers. You can imagine stuff sliding off the sides of the screen and so forth. Okay, so layers and the display controller. So a layer, as it says right there, is just something that provides a sequence of frames. So that can be anything. That could be something that just returns an animation. It could be something that's very boring and just returns one frame over and over again. The point of the layer object is to work in concert with the display controller. The display controller, each tick of the run loop goes through, I'm sorry, that's not quite right, every DMD event that it receives. It says, okay, I need to build a new frame. So I'm going to go through the mode queue, and I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to get the topmost mode that has a layer attribute. So it asks the mode, do you have a layer? If it has a layer, then it returns it. And basically, it composites the modes that have layers that are providing frames. It composites those all together. So that's probably pretty confusing, but you can imagine maybe if you had your mode queue and you have 2 modes on it. The bottom mode is just a mode that provides a score display. So you have your classic score display with like the current player's current score and the ball number. That has a layer which is delivering a frame that represents that information. And then higher up we have, maybe you start multi-ball. So we provide a new layer at that layer higher up, and that layer just gets put on top of the score display. In most cases, it's going to completely hide the score display, so you won't even know it's there. But the point is that you can add modes and remove modes, and what's displayed on the DMD will be a pretty intelligent representation of the current state of the game. And if that didn't make sense, please feel free to come up afterward and make me explain it more clearly. So we're going to add DMD to our saucer, and we're going to add a mode started. So that's pretty much just like what we saw before, or what we saw in the game started method. We're going to create a new layer here called text layer. We're going to give it a font, and we're going to tell it, I want this text to be centered. We'll set the text. So you can imagine this would be telling the player, shoot the saucer, because they can't tell that they need to shoot the saucer. So, and we're going to create an animation here. Say animation.load. We'll load that from disk. And then we'll create a frame layer, which is the simplest kind of layer. It just returns one frame over and over again. So we've got 2 layers here. What are we going to do with them? We're going to create a script. And a script is an array of dictionaries. And each dictionary has a layer key and a seconds key. The layer indicates the layer that we just created, and the seconds indicates the number of seconds to show that layer. And then with scripted layer, we're going to pass it that script. And the point of this is we've just made a slideshow, essentially. It's just going to send